We are back. The holiday blur is behind us, and this is the first episode of Daily Faceoff Live in 2025. The show is brought to you by Bet365. Download the app today. Use the promo code NATION. Whatever the moment, it's never ordinary over at Bet365. Tyler Remchuk and Frank Saravalli with you. Frank, how was your New Year's?
It was really quiet. Just rung in the new year with my kids, a little sparkling grape juice, maybe a little champagne for the adults. And I find New Year's Eve to be a relative amateur hour, so don't head out.
Yeah, I'm not that big of a New Year's guy either. Quickly, we're going to have Jonny Lazarus pop by in a little bit to do a full recap of the Winter Classic. But what did you make of the NHL's decision to put it on New Year's Eve versus New Year's Day?
I mean, the goal of any event is to get the most eyeballs possible. And going up against the college football playoff on New Year's Day doesn't really seem like the smartest move. So I like that they changed it up. And I think it's also like the perfect time to then lead right into the New Year's Eve celebration, right? So you've got it in the early evening, plenty of time to get something to eat and then do whatever it is that you want to do. If you're a fan heading to the game, it's the perfect way to start New Year's Eve.
Yeah, I agree with you 100%. I liked the switch up this year. All right, let's get into some other stuff before we get to Jonny Lazarus. Our poll question today, brought to you by Dominion Lending Center, Frank, was a bit of a look back at 2024. And our friend Paul Paduti wrote an excellent article over at dailyfaceoff.com about who was the most dominant player in 2024. So you can have your say over in the YouTube. You got Connor Hellebuyck, Connor McDavid, Nikita Kucherov, or Nathan MacKinnon. And let's dive into it a little bit ourselves here, Frank. To start the show, I'm going to throw you that question. Who was the most dominant player in your eyes in the calendar year of 2024?
Man, it's really hard. And it's not the answer. He wasn't a provided answer here, but how many players had a better 2024? And you made this point a couple of days ago than Sam Reinhart.
Yeah.
I mean, the goal scoring ability right at the very top of the league, the Stanley Cup, the new contract, a force for the Florida Panthers. I know he may not be considered the most dominant, so to speak, but he'd have to be right up there in terms of best 2024s. And from a dominance goal scoring perspective, he's certainly been nothing but consistent.
Yeah, and I think that's actually probably more fair than a lot of people think. You mentioned it. He's got the bling. He's got the bag. It was a good year for him personally as he got locked up in Florida. And the only player who was, I mean, him and Kirill Kaprizov were tied for the most goals scored in the calendar year, at least in regular season action, with 56. And then if you factor in the playoffs, that obviously gives Sam Reinhart the edge. For me, if I'm taking the question very literally and go like, who was the most dominant player in the calendar year? I know, and Christopher Palmer kind of says it here, like, look at the playoffs for Connor Hellebuyck, enough said. But in the regular season, Frank, his save percentage was like 8 points higher than any other goalie. Yeah. Like, you look at what the Jets were able to do, again, playoffs notwithstanding, what does that Winnipeg team look like if Connor Hellebuyck, it was 11 points higher than anyone else? Like, that's crazy.
Yeah, and the other thing, too, is he was the first goalie since 2015 to have 9 shutouts in one calendar year. So, I mean, being totally flawless 9 times in that run as well in a 64-game stretch. Look how far clear he was of everyone else in wins, at least 12 more than the next closest guy. If you were to make the argument that Hellebuyck was the most dominant of any person to put on an NHL uniform last year, I don't know that you'd be wrong. Certainly at his position.
Yeah, and that's kind of where I was going, was like, okay, McDavid versus MacKinnon. You can kind of be like, Connor had the better playoffs, but Nate was so good and so dominant, played so many minutes in the regular season. And then there's the Reinhart answer, and then there's the Kucherov answer. But to me, like, when you're talking goaltending, which is the most important position in the game, it's Hellebuyck, and then there's no one else in his category. So I think Hellebuyck would be a very deserving answer. But I mean, even Nathan MacKinnon, you look at the season he put together, winning the MVP, 143 points in the calendar year. That is really quite something. As we continue, Frank.
I was going to say, you also really can't overlook the 2024 that Quinn Hughes had. I think the big question heading into the season was, would he be able to pick up where he left off? And yeah, I mean, for me, with what he has to work with, I think it's a lot less than what Cale Makar has in Colorado. That I think he's he picked up right where he left off to close out last season with the Norris. It's just that his playoff was a little bit disappointing.
Yeah, and that's fair. Another thing we threw out there at dailyfaceoff.com was our most read stories of 2024. And the number one subgenre, if you want to call it that, was your trade targets, Frank, but also some of your most read stories. You had your 32 bold predictions where you said the Oilers will finally end Canada's Stanley Cup drought. That was our number one most read story. Number two was the NHL drafting up a schedule with the Coyotes relocated to Salt Lake City. Again, you were all over that. Number three was your article about Darnell Nurse and his struggles
during the playoffs.
during the playoffs. And then number four was the one you did most recently of sounding the alarm on the state of hockey in North America. These were the top four. Which story? Maybe it even wasn't one of these. What was your favorite story to write in the last calendar year?
I was definitely reporting on the Coyotes moving to Utah. It's hard to get a clean scoop in today's world, but that's about as close as you're going to get, and confirming in real short order after that the team was actually moving to Utah well before it was made official. That was one you put in your backpack and you smile about.
Yeah, and I remember going through comments and things like that.
How often were Coyotes fans on us watching this show saying like, you're out to lunch, you're clueless, and yeah, about that.
Yeah, I remember that very vividly, like the conversations we were having, like, hey, there's rumblings, okay, and yeah, you were on it from the jump. Let's take 2024. Let's crumple it up. Let's throw it to the side, Frank. Let's look clearly ahead at 2025. And I got a couple of questions for you. The first one, who's one player whose stock you're buying heading into this fresh year?
Tim Stützle of the Ottawa Senators. So supremely talented. I truly believe that what we're seeing with Stützle, he's just starting to scratch the surface. I think he's, in relatively short order here, he's going to be the next 100-point player to break through. I know there's still quite a bit of work to do to get to that point, but I think he's evolved in a real meaningful way. I think the Sens have as well, and they're a team to keep an eye on. I think they can, break through and be a playoff team this year. They entered the new year in a playoff position and are in pretty good spot to do so, particularly with the Rangers floundering the way that they have. And Tim Stützle would be leading the charge. I think he's still got a ways to go to get to his ceiling.
Yeah, I love that. We had Jason York on in one of our last shows before the Christmas break, and he talked about how this is a guy that is developing not just into a star, but he can hit that superstar level in the NHL.
Who you got?
I'm going with Dylan Guenther, and maybe a little bit of homerism. He's an Edmonton boy. I remember covering him back in his WHL days with the Edmonton Oil Kings, but I also remember this stretch, and it came about this time in the year in his second season with the Oil Kings, where like the effort didn't get any better, nothing changed, but pucks started to go in. And what he did was he learned where he could release pucks at the WHL level and those kind of soft spots that you hear of elite goal scorers finding. And I think about that with his NHL game now. The goals were coming for him at the start of this year, and he's hit a little bit of a cold snap here in the last month. But I think this is a guy who in the next year is going to once again figure out where those soft spots are. He's so smart and his shot is so good. I think Utah locking this guy up to the 7-year, $7 million extension, Frank, I think that was an unbelievable piece of business, because I think this guy's going to be a 40 goal scorer more often than not through his 7-year deal.
That contract, I think, is already a bargain. Look, he's on track for 35 goals this year, was recently trending up closer to 40. And that's also the perfect transition into a team that I'm a believer in, and I think is going to change how we view them in 2025. And that's Utah Hockey Club. We did just talk briefly about the Coyotes, and I think there's still this sort of stink on them of, hey, this is an Arizona team that's never won anything. And I know the jerseys are different and the city that they're playing in is different, but this team as a whole, this organization still has something to prove. And I think this year, Utah has been so much better than anyone wants to give them credit for. I think they're scrappy. I think they compete. I think what they've done without some of the players that they're missing on their back end, and Sean Dursey and John Marino and Maverick Lamoureux, has been exceptional. And the fact that they've done all this in a year in which their projected number one goalie and Connor Ingram has been terrible, I think it's nothing but big things for Utah moving forward. I picked them to make the playoffs this year. I didn't see those injuries coming, and the fact that they're still in the mix to maybe do so with those guys out, I think says a lot about where this team is going. I think once they get in, you're not going to knock Utah Hockey Club out of the playoffs for the next 5 to 8 years.
I'm with you. I mean, the injuries, sometimes it can be like a curse and a blessing, but the blessing side of it is I think they know what they have in Maverick Lamoureux now, and it's a very, very good defenseman who can handle the NHL minutes. And even with their extensions that are going to kick in, they're going to have close to or north of $20 million in cap space this offseason. They're going to have wiggle room. They have a good young nucleus. I'm with you. I love that pick. The question was, and I'm taking it a different way, but it was like, what franchise will change our perception of them in the next year? And Frank, I'm taking it the reverse. I think by this time next year, we are going to be talking about the New York Islanders in the lottery conversation. I don't see a path to it getting better. I don't see a core that really can improve over the next calendar year. The only thing that makes me maybe a little bit hesitant is like, hey, Ilya Sorokin is still going to keep being Ilya Sorokin. So maybe he can keep them from truly, truly bottoming out. But I still don't think that'll be enough. I think we could see a bit of a sell-off maybe at the deadline or this summer, and then I think things could get ugly for the next 12 to 18 months out on Long Island.
I agree. And if you were going to, put a gun to my head and say, pick another team in the NHL that you think their fortunes are going to have a downturn over this next calendar year, the next one for me would be Tampa Bay.
Ooh. Wow.
They're on track for like another 4 to 5 point reduction in the standings. And after that, there's no other 4 to 5 point reduction to go. You're out of the playoffs.
And hey, we've seen the other kind of big guns and teams that have gone on long Stanley Cup runs, the Pittsburghs and things like that. They've hit that wall eventually too. So it's not crazy to think that it could come for Tampa Bay. It's just, man, in the moment, it's hard to be like, no, you're telling me Kucherov and Hedman and Vasilevsky are going to stop being able to get the job done.
Yeah.
But yeah.
And added Gensel. And I get it. I just, at some point again, that core just keeps aging, right?
Yeah, that's fair. All right. Once again, we're going to be joined by Jonny Lazarus in a few minutes, Frank. But one team that has flipped our perception of them just in the last couple of months has been the LA Kings. And they were the lone game on the schedule yesterday. And it was a 3-0 win. Third straight victory as well for the LA Kings. And it was Darcy Kemper tossing up a 33 save shutout. So the number 3, very prominent here. But this is a Kings team, 22-10-5, second in the Pacific Division. Yourself and Jason Greger talked about this on the DFO rundown the other day. And since then, I mean, what have they done? Picked up another 2 wins actually in that stretch. Darcy Kemper, I mean, you talked a lot about Kopitar, Frank, and the kind of untalked about season he's having. This guy being 10-2-5, he's only allowed more than 3 goals in a game once this season, and it came back in October. That Dubois for Kemper deal is turning out to maybe be the win-win deal of 2024.
Yeah, it's looked pretty good. You see the rejuvenation from Dubois in Washington, kind of, I don't want to say a last chance for a guy in the second year of an 8-year deal, but it certainly felt like his career is at a crossroads. He's answered, and Kemper too. Like, I think we probably underestimated the idea that this is a familiar place for him. Like, he wasn't walking into the LA Kings facility for the first time, having, been there before. So that helps. I also think just as a whole, this team, really what they learned in playing under Todd McClellan with their structure and discipline, they're playing obviously a totally different style now under Jim Hiller, one that's way more conducive to offensive success. And you've seen that, but they haven't lost a lot of the core tenets, the compete level and the defensive awareness that was, so key under McClellan, that I think has served them really well. This Kings team and our guy, Scott Maxwell, did a fantastic job last season at Daily Faceoff. He accurately predicted who the 4 conference finalists would be. And he's got another story up this year, taking a look at some of the underlying numbers, including expected goals for per 60 minutes and expected goals against per 60 minutes at 5-on-5. And he's got the LA Kings right in there in terms of being in his final 4 this year. So they've been a dominant team, number 1 in the league at expected goals against per 60 minutes, and their offense is 8th. So in the same category. So 1st and 8th, 2 pretty good places to be if you're the Kings.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, if Quentin Byfield can keep this current level up as well, 6 goals in his last 10. I'm not saying he's got to do that. That's insane. But him playing the way he is with Jeannot and
started
Fogle
so
on his
slow.
wing, Yeah, he did. But those three, I just think in a playoff series, big bodies who can all score, man, they could be a real handful come playoff time. Let's continue along. Frank, something the NHL's doing this month to kick off the end of the quarter century, I guess you could call it. It's 2025. They're going through and they're naming a first and second, call it all-star team for the quarter century for every franchise. Today, I wanted to zero in on the Chicago Blackhawks, who was the team of the day on New Year's Day. And you would think it's pretty straightforward, right? They won all those championships in the last 10, 15 years. So you got Taves and Kane, Keith Seabrook and Crawford. For me, the one part that made me or had me raise my eyebrow, Patrick Sharp over Marian Hossa on that first team. I mean, I know Hossa wasn't there for all that long, but he still won all those cups there.
Yeah, that's a swap I would make, with all due respect to Patrick Sharp. I think Hossa was the more impactful player, as important as a piece that Sharp was. And a couple other things. I would take out Alex DeBrincat and I would put in Artemi Panarin. I know that he didn't win a cup there, but I think if you're, again, talking about impact, for me, that stands out. If you wanted to even leave DeBrincat in and take Saad out, but find a way to get Panarin there. And the only other one that was kind of a head scratcher, and then I guess when you think about it and you do the quarter century team and you go through the voting process, you realize like this is actually way harder than you think. Because I was asked to vote for the Flyers quarter century team by the NHL, and I had such a hard time with the goalies. But I'm looking at this one, I'm like, Jocelyn Thibault, that's really the guy. That's the second best goalie that they had. But I guess it all makes sense.
Yeah, because at first when I read this, I was like, wait, where's Antti Niemi? He won a Stanley Cup with the Hawks. But then it's like, oh, he only played the one season there. Thibault had 3 full seasons in this quarter century. So it kind of makes sense.
I get what you're saying. I'm still going with the guy that won a Stanley Cup. Even if it's just one season, how many more impactful games did Jocelyn Thibault play over his Blackhawks career than Antti Niemi? Same reason why Brian Boucher was there a long time. So then it was like, hey, how do you pick the Flyers' second goalie? Like, for me, I'm going with the guy who won the shootout to get them to the playoffs in 2010.
Yeah, that's fair. We're going to dissect a bunch of these over the next 30 days here on the show. But quickly, something that ties this Hawks team into the recent headlines, Jonathan Toews coming out in GQ and saying like, hey, I don't view my NHL career as being finished. What did you make of that?
I was a little sour about that. I'm not going to lie. I can pull up my text message for you. I can't show you, but I text Jonathan Toews. Let's see if I can find the date. Well before that came out. And it was on December 19th. And I said, hey, John, hearing some rumblings that you may gear up for an NHL return. Crickets.
Oh.
No reply. And I was like, You know, it's interesting about Jonathan Toews. He's obviously a couple years in now to the Hall of Fame counter that you need to not play. He would reset the clock. I don't know if that matters to him or not. He's a surefire first ballot Hall of Famer whenever he decides. But I get the feeling that he just didn't necessarily like the way that things ended and didn't have a chance to go out on his own terms.
Maybe one of those stories we'll hear about in 2025. Maybe it'll be one of those top right articles we look back on a year from now, a potential Jonathan Toews return. Let's stick with the Blackhawks and dig in a little bit to the Winter Classic that went down a couple days ago at Wrigley. It's the All-32. It's brought to you by Charm Diamond Centers, proudly Canadian owned and operated since 1972. And you can get a custom ring built and delivered in less than 4 weeks with the Charm Masterpiece program. It all comes with their unbeatable pricing policy. For more information, go to charmdiamondcenters.com. How about international man of travel, Jonny Lazarus? I guess national man of travel from Wrigley. He's already back at MSG, but Johnny wanted to recap the Winter Classic with you out at Wrigley Field on New Year's Eve. You were there, boots on the ground, got to experience it firsthand. And I do think like when these games get announced and we hear Winter Classic and it's Chicago or whoever again, some fans kind of like roll their eyes and are like, oh man, we have to see the Hawks in another Winter Classic. Then you see the spectacle of the game at Wrigley, and on TV, it looks stunning. What did you make of your in-person experience at the Winter Classic?
Well, when I wasn't embarrassing Colby, I was having a great time. It was a blast. And the production, the music, Smashing Pumpkins, Chance the Rapper, like the NHL adding concerts into it also has made it just so much more than a hockey game, right? And I think it already was more than a hockey game when you brought it outdoors, but they just continue to bring on more and more to make it an all-day festival. Essentially, it's celebrating the game of hockey, and that's what it's all about. I had a blast doing it. The game itself, obviously the Blues dominate from start to finish, so it wasn't the most competitive game, or not everyone was really bought into the game, but everything outside of the game I thought was 10 out of 10.
First
What are you
question:
holding in, Frank?
is that a camel hair jacket?
I don't know what camel hair means. Like the animal. No, it's not.
Oh, so disappointing.
I got this from like Zara.
Look, what a man of style. Look, Jonny, the game you mentioned was pretty disappointing. I'm told that Kyle Davidson, the Blackhawks GM, tore a strip off the players in the locker room after the game. What'd you make of some of the comments that we saw? You had Pat Maroon on your show, Morning Cup of Hockey, today, talking about how embarrassing the effort was. But in terms of the reaction from the Blackhawks after the Winter Classic.
Well, what Pat said, which I found interesting, was like outside, or he said it felt like a game 7, right? Like for a team that doesn't necessarily have playoff aspirations. I mean, obviously everyone in that locker room will tell you they want to make the playoffs, but if they're being realistic with themselves, making the playoffs wasn't so realistic for Chicago this year. So you circle that game on the calendar, and it's a game where everyone, not only at a national scale, but internationally, is watching that game. So the Blackhawks knew that all eyes were on them, and for them to go out and perform the way they did, obviously it's incredibly disappointing. And, I think that's a game that everyone was looking forward to. Everyone had family coming. I played an outdoor game at a college level, and even at the college level, it's like the game you really want to show up for. And what's interesting too, conversations I've had now with younger players and people around the league, is that kids now grow up of dreaming of playing in the Winter Classic. It's been around for 15 years now, 16 years maybe. I think 2008 was the first one, and it's become something that's so popular and so unique and so rare that everyone dreams of the opportunity to play in one, and we might not get a second chance at doing that. So the Blackhawks players that are younger that might not see another Winter Classic, it's something that they'll have to live with and be disappointed with probably for a long time.
Hey, let me ask you about the flip side of this matchup in the St. Louis Blues. They're on the outside looking in when it comes to the playoff picture in the Western Conference. But, I mean, Doug Armstrong seems to be, in quotes, kind of going for it a bit, right? He acquires Cam Fowler the other day. Maybe they aren't done yet. It was a big win for the Blues. Yes, again, it was against the Hawks. When you look at this St. Louis team, again, I know you're mainly covering things out east, but do you think they have playoff potential, or are they just kind of one of those middling, mediocre teams in the West?
They're interesting, right? Because I think they do have some solid young guys, and even young guys that have experience, right? Like Robert Thomas and Jordan Kyrou, I'd still say are pretty young, but they've been in the league now for 4, 5, 6 years, right? So they're a little bit of those older veteran young guys. And then, like you have watched a lot, Dylan Holloway, a great young player. Jake Neighbors, I think, had 30 goals last year, essentially out of nowhere. Like they have a good balance of youth and veterans, guys like Pavel Buchnevich, who signed an extension there, Braden Shen. You look at their back end, they're obviously missing Torrey Krug, but getting Cam Fowler, bringing in Broberg, Justin Falk, Parayko, these are guys who have a lot of Ryan Suter. I mean, these are guys who have so much experience. And Binnington, if he's at the top of his game, he's one of the better goalies in the league, I think. It's just finding that level of consistency with him that's tough. But there's no reason on paper why this team shouldn't make the playoffs, if you ask me. I think their biggest issue, which, Colby and I highlighted, I think, before the season started, was probably their speed on the blue line. They have a little bit of a slower, I'd say, blue line compared to other teams in the NHL. But if they're getting saves, if they're, possessing the puck offensively, it's going to boost them. But, I'd look at them as a playoff team. Again, though, the West is so competitive. It's hard to say they're better than the 8 teams that, would be in the playoff run right now. But if there is a way to squeak in, St. Louis would be the team that can do it.
Yeah, it'd be interesting if they can get in. I do think they're kind of one of those teams, and they talked about it on the broadcast too. Like, is there anyone? You can go to a playoff series with Jordan Binnington, who's been there, done that. Mm-hmm. They got guys who kind of have. So it would be interesting if they can get in. Jonny, hope you had fun out at the Winter Classic, and now it's back to covering the Rangers. So enjoy that.
Thank you, guys. Happy New Year.
Fine, Jonny. He's one half of Morning Cup of Hockey here on the Daily Faceoff YouTube. Frank, let's move along to our poll question results brought to you by Dominion Lending Centers. Is your mortgage up for renewal in 2025? Then you should be hitting up our friends at Dominion Lending. Lock in the best rates and products with Dominion Lending Centers, and you can find them online, dominionlending.ca. Frank, your Daily Faceoff inbox question. We got a couple in the chat. This one from Steve. He says, should I trade or hold Austin Matthews in my fantasy league? I'm just using that to kind of pivot. Frank, how worried should Leafs fans and I guess also fantasy owners be about Matthews and his injury?
I think pretty concerned. The fact that there are no answers and the fact that he hinted yesterday that this may be something that lingers for a long time, I would consider moving on. If it's a keeper league, obviously not, but for the short term, he's already missed 37% of the team's games so far this season. That's a pretty significant number. So, yeah, we'll see.
We also had a bunch of people early on in the YouTube chat talking about how much they enjoyed the Ask Frank episode of Frankly Speaking, which is out now. And you basically just fielded questions for the whole thing. What was the favorite question you answered?
Probably from Uncle Kerry about some red wine lifestyle questions. So gave some good picks on some Brunello wines if you're into Italian reds. And I'll say my biggest regret for the Frankly Speaking Q&A episode was that I did not come prepared with a bottle of water, because I talked for 71 consecutive minutes and I was just like at the end, I was like a dog just dying for a drink. And so I guess I could have paused it and picked it back up again, but I was grinding. So
it was all one take?
All one take. Literally did
God.
not hit the stop record button at all. I was like, boop. And then talked for 71 consecutive minutes. And I hated myself afterwards.
That is good. Okay, our poll question results, by the way. Who was the most dominant player in 2024? Over on our Twitter account, 43% had Connor McDavid as their pick, with Nathan McKinnon in second, Connor Hellebuck a close third. Over on the YouTube, it was Connor McDavid at 36%, and once again, McKinnon and Hellebuck in second and third, respectively. So everyone's on the same page.
No love, man. He's so good.
Was he your heart pick last year?
He was not.
Okay.
Yeah, sorry. Kucherov was. Yes, I did vote him number one for Hart, and I was slightly surprised that he didn't win. And go back to what I was just saying about Tampa Bay. Like, had Kucherov not been there, like, I don't know that Tampa Bay makes the playoffs. And John Cooper basically said that.
Yeah, that's fair. Let's let's move along to our Bet365 daily bets. Download the app today. Use the promo code NATION. Whatever the moment, it's never ordinary at Bet365. I got a couple of picks here for tonight, starting with the Leafs on the money line. I feel like no Matthews is maybe pushing this line closer to even, but I mean, the Leafs won plenty of games without number 34 earlier in the year. The Leafs are only 8-8 on the road, but the Islanders, they're 7-10 on home ice this season. They were 3-3 on home ice in the month of December. I have no problem laying the -120 here with the Leafs as they take on the Islanders. And then one more straight bet for you. I like the over between Buffalo and Colorado. High-powered Avs offense, a Sabres team that struggled to prevent goals so far this year. I know they're playing better hockey as of late, but still, over 6.5 at +100. I like that spot between Buffalo and Colorado. Frank?
No, it's just funny that Buffalo, like, it depends on the week, but like each team has had, it feels like a spell where they're just absolutely in one. And it's been the Rangers, it's been the Sabres. This week, I think the punching bag might be the Chicago Blackhawks because of the visibility for the Winter Classic. It just feels like someone's in it at some point or another, and it's probably not a good feeling. But the Sabres are back.
Yeah, I mean, still only 3-7 in their last 10, but they rattled off those 3 wins. Everyone's feeling good again in Buffalo.
They scored 17 goals in 3 games.
Yeah, that's fair. That is fair. That's why I like the over tonight. Let's wrap up the show with a little bit of garbage time, Frank, and a little bit of World Junior talk. Let's go back to that New Year's Eve game between Canada and the USA, which the USA won. I don't want to call it handedly, but I mean, 8 power plays in the game, and the US was very opportunistic, even though they were outshot. Wanted to highlight this celebration on the opener, though, from Cole Hudson. Frank, what do you think about this? Plug in the ears, going by the Canadian crowd?
Yeah, there was a lot of taunting going on in that game. It got pretty heated. There was some jawing going on in the penalty box. You see, had a message. Someone had a message for the Canadian bench at some point. There's just a lot to unpack here, and it just speaks to the rivalry. It speaks to, man, I hope Austin Matthews is healthy for the Four Nations face-off, because I'm telling you, Saturday night in Montreal, the day after Valentine's Day, you can just hook it right into my veins, because this is going to be that on steroids.
Absolutely. It is a quarterfinal day over at the World Juniors. You got USA Switzerland coming up in about 2 hours. Finland, Slovakia later on. And the nightcap is Canada and Czechia. Stephen Ellis will have it all covered for us over at dailyfaceoff.com. And maybe we'll even mix in a little bit of it tomorrow on the show, because we're back to our regular schedule Monday through Friday, noon Eastern, right here on the Daily Faceoff YouTube. Thanks for tuning in today. Enjoy all the hockey around the entire hockey world tonight, and we'll chat with you again tomorrow for a Friday edition of the show. What's up, hockey fans? If you enjoyed that video, then you're going to want to hit the subscribe button to not miss any of our content, from daily live shows with Frank Saravalli to analysis from former NHLers to exclusive interviews with some of the biggest names in the hockey world on Frankly Speaking. You're going to want to hit that subscribe button and stay up to date with everything going on in the hockey world.